ready to beam up, Mr. Scott.
Permission to come aboard, sir.
Joining us today is a man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. We're here with Walter Koenig, best known as Chekov from the original Star Trek series and 6 Star Trek movies. But sir, you were a later addition to the cast, and I've heard you were brought in so the show could attract a younger audience, the kind of audience the Monkees was drawing. Is that true, or is that just kind of an urban legend?
No, that happens to be the truth. The urban legend is that Pravda, Russian newspaper, complained that there weren't any Russians on Star Trek. That's the legend. That was made up by the publicity department at Paramount. The fact is that they were trying to find somebody who would have the same appeal that, somebody like Davy Jones or the Monkees had.
And on the show, you played a Soviet, as you mentioned, and the show aired during the height of the Cold War. Did you encounter any negative reaction from this?
I certainly didn't encounter any negative reactions. My fan base was pretty much very young kids, 8 to 14. And they weren't tuned in to what was happening politically as much as they were to the length of the hair of the performers that they liked. So I never received any bad, I received a lot of mail, but I never received anything negative.
And when I was watching the show, I thought you had what sounded to my ear like a really great accent. But did any native speakers ever give you compliments about it or say if it was authentic?
I had a couple of Russian girls tell me they thought it was good, but when I listened to a real Russian speak English, I can certainly tell the difference. It never captured the melody that is prevalent in English-speaking Russians.
Now, after the show was canceled, many years later, a lot of the cast members reunited for the animated series on TV, and it brought back a lot of the original writers writing scripts, but your character was replaced with an alien, and then you actually wrote a script for one of the episodes. Can you explain how all that came about?
Well, my agent, I guess, had sent over a script to Gene Roddenberry of something that I had written, nothing to do with Star Trek. And I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg, the hiring or the rejection. But in any case, I was asked I'd be interested in writing one of the episodes. When it came time to cast in the show, the company that was financing and putting up their money decided that they didn't want to use all the actors. And in fact, they tried to get by without using George Takei and Nichelle Nichols, and has Majel Barrett do Nichelle's voice and Jimmy Doohan do George's. But Leonard Nimoy felt that they were important to the actual launching of Star Trek as a live-action series and felt that they needed to be included. And he gave them an ultimatum that he would not be on board if they did not include George and Nichelle. I was, as you said earlier, a later addition and wasn't there to help the series get started. So I guess that same condition didn't apply to me. And in that, they had given me an episode to write. So I think maybe they thought that they were appeasing me or somehow compensating me for not involving an actor.
Now, with all the early episodes you were involved in, which one was the favorite for your character?
Spectre of the Gun.
Now, of course, you've been in all the Star Trek films that featured the original cast, but you're one of the few actors from the original series to appear in Generations. How did it feel to be involved in the passing of the mantle, as it were?
Well, I didn't have too much feeling about it either way. Frankly, I turned it down the first time they offered it to me. The substantial money notwithstanding, part didn't in any way address any of the issues that I felt were still left unresolved in terms of my character. However, I had a meeting with Berman and some of his writers, and we worked out some ideas that would make Chekov's contribution a little bit more profound, and on that basis I signed the board. So it was really not a matter of handing over the mantle or anything of that nature. It was simply whether the character was going to be well served. And the postscript is, they wrote it and shot it, but they edited out all of those things. So in the end, there wasn't much to show for my presence.
What kind of character issues did you think were unresolved?
Well, there was the fact that there was no character. That it was a very two-dimensional role. It was there an expository function, simply to promote the plot, but without any real insight into who the character was. I found that somewhat unrewarding.
Now, something that's kind of a funny thing with Chekhov, I know fans noticed, is that he's often injured. He got the earwigs in Wrath of Khan, and then in Voyage Home had the head injury. Why do you think it is that the writers kept having your character get injured?
I think it had been established in the series that if you want to have one of the regulars be involved in a jeopardy and show demonstrable response to that injury, go with the youngest guy who'll be least mature and probably less able to contain his feelings. There's nothing negative in that. I certainly understand that it's the idea that the more experienced you are, the stronger you become as an officer, and also less unbecoming for a young officer, a young ensign, to express pain than it would be for somebody more established. So it started with the television series, and I think they just became where if you were going to show somebody in distress, it would probably be Chekhov.
Now, since the movies, you've been keeping the role of Chekhov alive through the internet, the Star Trek The New Voyages web series, and that's got a real interesting history about how it's done out of the love for the show and not profit. And because you went on the show, it added a lot of legitimacy to the project, and I know you became a bit of a hero to the digital generation who felt like bucking the studio system and doing things on this new medium. How did you get involved with bringing Chekhov to New Voyages?
Well, I was approached by somebody who was connected to the project, and my initial reaction was not positive. But when I was told that I could pretty much dictate the kind of story they would tell, I thought about that and thought, well, here is that opportunity that has been missed all these years to get an introspective insight into who Chekhov is and how he reacts and what he thinks. More than simply saying, Captain, the Klingons are about to attack. Here we got to find out about what Chekhov thinks about a whole arena of issues, not simply relate plot information. So when it was brought to my attention if you might do a story sequel to Deadly Years, I thought that was a terrific way to have Chekhov come to grips with his life and what he believes in and how he thinks. And so, yeah, this was the episode that was never shot previously, and it brought me a lot of satisfaction for the opportunity to perform it.
How did it feel to be playing Chekhov again, only against all new actors playing the old roles?
Well, I brought the new chap along. Andy brought him to his show, the Star Trek satire, and he did Project Chekhov. And so when it came time to find the young Chekhov, I brought his name up. Well, I was very pleased. I think he did a great job, and I'm very pleased for him. I have no pangs of remorse or jealousy or any of that kind of stuff, because I'm so far past playing Chekhov as a young man that it would be hardly of any purpose in having any kind of venal reactions. I was very pleased for him. I hope it brings some bigger and better things along the way.
Now, looking ahead to some current projects you have a new movie coming out for the Sci-Fi Channel called Bone Eater. Can you tell us about that?
Well, there's almost nothing to tell. I mean, one scene, it's hardly a showcase role. I was at a dubbing session last week. It looked okay. That's pretty much all I can tell you about it. I'd rather talk about Gods and Men, the second Star Trek episode that I was involved in, than talk about Bone Eaters.
Okay, not a problem. Let's talk of Gods and Men. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, that, even though it was shot on the same sets and using many of the same costumes that we used in To Serve All My Days, it was really a different production company heading this project. Of the people involved, most specifically Sky Conway as the producer, brought in all professional actors. Everybody who's on the screen has been on television and or movies, and almost all of them made appearances in one or the other of the Star Trek manifestations television series through the years. So it was a very professional cast. We did a very dynamic story, the premise of which might be what would the Star Trek universe have been like had Captain Kirk never lived. So with that in mind, Chekov is really two people. He is who he is at the beginning of the story, and at the end, but in the middle, he is somebody really quite different.
And is that available for people to watch now?
No, it will be available on ofgodsandmen.com, probably starting in June. They're doing it as a 3-chapter episode, probably running once a month for 3 months, or once every 2 weeks or 6 weeks. I'm not quite sure. But anybody who is interested can go to that site and get the most current information about it.
And given that you've been playing Chekov since the 60s, and every time we think Chekov is done, he comes back in a video game or a web series or a movie, do you have any other plans to play Chekov again in the future?
No, I don't. I think we squeezed much blood out of that rock. We're moving on to other things.
Now, when you're working on some of these fan projects like Of Gods and Men, given that you were on the original sets in the 60s and that was where you worked every day, how authentic are the sets on these fan projects?
Well, they're absolutely museum quality. They're absolutely perfect replicas. The costumes and the sets were James Coy is the designer, builder of all the sets there in New York. And he worked from the original blueprints in terms of set construction and also from the original designs for the costumes. So there's absolutely no room for debate about it. They are perfect.
Now, did you keep any souvenirs or memorabilia from your time on Star Trek?
Well, we weren't given anything to speak of, certainly not during the television days. I do have the leather outfit I wore in Star Trek 4, the one that I wore on the streets of San Francisco. I'd have that, but that's really the only piece of memorabilia that I own.
Do you own any of the collectible props or replicas or any of the multitude of Star Trek things that are made?
Not Star Trek props, no. They were very kind to give me a couple of the Disney figures, and if I had those.
Oh, which ones do you have?
I have that's about 2 feet tall, the Mickey dancing on the book, and Donald scowling. What else does Donald do with scowl anyway? I thought very nice, and I have him at the top of my staircase when I come here to work. Mickey very enthusiastically welcomed me to a good day at the computer, and Donald was saying, "Don't scoot up." I am appropriately cautioned to do good work when I sit down here.
Are you a big Disney fan?
I'm a comic character fan, comic strip character fan. I have a collection of, that goes back to the turn of the century. And figurines, Tindak buttons, old comic cards, big little books, all of those things.
Now, something that a lot of your fans may not know about you is you've also done a lot of writing. In addition to the episode of the animated series I mentioned, you wrote for the comic book Raver, and you have an autobiography and some science fiction novels. These days, do you prefer writing over acting?
Well, I find that writing, it's always given me a very special kind of joy, and it's more accessible to me. As a well-directed go, it's more accessible to me than acting is. Finding it, of course, far more difficult to find work as an actor than I did at one time. On the other hand, I have combined the acting in a recurring project so that it will also give me an opportunity. I combined the writing, I think I said that, in a current project to also give me an opportunity to act. I've written a screenplay called InAlienable, which we are about 2 months from beginning production on, shooting. We have a director, we are producers. Sky Conway is my partner in this. We're contracting with a animatronic company to do the very special effects that we require. And we have about a third of the picture cast. So this will go into production at the end of May, and I'm looking forward to being involved.
So will this film be a theatrical release or direct to video or for sci-fi or something?
Well, the financing dictates the first release, the first market we are exposed to will be the internet. This will be a downloadable 4K internet production. Unlike the New Voyages films that I was involved with, which are offered for free, there will be a very nominal price placed on download for InAlienable. The hope is that we can recoup the investment and perhaps after that go on to show it in festivals and market it as merchandise it as a DVD, etc.
For people who want to keep up with this, should they go to your official website, walterkoenig.com, or does it have its own site?
It will have its own site. I don't think it's been launched yet. I think once we hear action on that first day of shooting, we'll know that we're in we're in production and that it's all going to transpire. Here, I don't know if you know the history of Star Trek 1, but we had several false start dates over the course of the years. And it became less and less a reality to me that it was ever going to be even made. So I've become a little gun shy on that basis. And although I feel very confident we will make this film, and since we do have the money for it, there really isn't anything to stand in our way. I still would prefer, that now that we don't make an official announcement, although I'm perfectly happy for you to print this, but to make an official announcement on behalf of InAlienable Productions, the film is being shot or done. So, to answer your question in as circumloquacious manner as possible, I don't think there is a website quite yet.
So while you're mostly known as an actor and a writer, your degree was in psychology, and I was just curious, how did you go from wanting to study psychology to the theatrical arts?
Well, I'd always had an interest in acting. I found a measure of reinforcement when I was younger. I did plays in school with leading roles, and I was always full of some very nice feedback and made me feelings of self-esteem. But I never thought of acting as a practical profession. And of course it isn't. Even as a kid, didn't really dare to believe that that could be part of my life in a professional manner. So I chose an area that I felt I had some rapport with, psychology, and that I could make a contribution. I discovered, however, that being a social science and not a physical science, there are no absolutes and there are no perfect answers to anything. And in fact, I became a bit discouraged with the idea that it was also subjective, that one person's guess is probably as good as another as to why people behave the way they do. Of course, you come a long way since then, and we learn that there's a physiological basis to a lot of psychological aberration and deviant behavior. And more psychology and psychiatry is being drawn into a medical perspective, which is probably a good thing, since I don't think anybody from Freud on really can approach a subject like the emotional and mental health of somebody objectively as it needs to be done.
I know that you've taught acting and writing privately at several schools, but I also read that you taught at the California School of Professional Psychology. Were you just teaching a straight psych class, or did your acting have something to do with that?
Well, I was using acting skills and acting tools for the purpose of giving these graduate students an increased awareness of how they behave and enable them to work with clients. From the very reason I just said, it's very difficult to have an objective voice when discussing or analyzing emotional and psychological behavior. And I felt that if they knew where they were coming from, they could probably be more discerning in their rapport and communication with the clients that they would have. So I gave them acting exercises and we asked them to do character studies on the people they were playing. It was a very rewarding experience. I think the students thoroughly enjoyed it, and I certainly did.
One last question. There's a lot of talk lately about J.J. Abrams bringing Star Trek back to the big screen, using original characters but a whole new cast. As one of those cast members, how do you feel about that?
I'm not sure I have any strong feelings. I'm curious. I've long since abandoned any territorial feelings about the character. Proprietary feelings, I don't really have those very much anymore, as evidenced by the fact that I brought this young man in to play Chekov and a day Bray. So, no, I'm curious. I like what they do. I've heard some interesting names in the mix. Matt Damon, Captain Kirk, and, I can't think of the other two guys, Bach and McCoy, but it seems like interesting choices. So, yeah, I'm curious to see how it came out. I definitely go to the show.
All right, well, thank you very much for taking some time to talk to me. I've really appreciated it, and I'm sure all your fans have too.
Good. I'm glad I was able to help.
Gentlemen, your work today has been outstanding. I intend to recommend you all for promotion in whatever fleet we end up serving.
Now Playing is a production of Venganza Media Incorporated. All rights reserved.